Hey everybody, Chris, the old-ass retro gamer here. It's been a while since I've done one of these episodes, but I think it's about time that I bring it back. And that is the Diamonds in the Rough series. Diamonds in the Rough are games that I feel do not get enough attention, games that kind of flew under the radar when they were first released, and still to this day, I do not hear very many people talking about them at all, either on YouTube or on Facebook in the groups that I'm in. It's a shame because there are a lot of games out there that just people have no idea are actually worthwhile. So that's what this series is about. And today, what console am I going to be discussing? The original Xbox. Back when the Xbox came out in the early 2000s, I was extremely reluctant to jump on board. I had a PlayStation 2 and I was extremely happy with that. I was also not very pleased with the role that Microsoft had in the downfall of the Dreamcast. As you probably already know, Microsoft had a hand in creating the operating system that the Dreamcast used, and at the same time, Microsoft was also gathering intel on how to create their own console from collaborating with Sega on the Dreamcast. And when the Dreamcast was about to go under, Sega asked Microsoft for a little help in the money department, and Microsoft said,
"Eat a bag of dicks, brah."
It was upsetting for me because right after that, the kibosh was put on the Dreamcast, and sadness ensued. A friend of mine picked up an Xbox, and when he did, I went over to his place to see what it was all about, because I knew virtually nothing about the console. I just wasn't really interested in it. And I was kind of blown away by what it was able to do. He had picked up Halo. Halo just completely, mind. I was sold, and it wasn't too long before I had one of my own. And until around 2006, 2007, the Xbox really held its own against Sony and the PlayStation 2, and there were lots and lots of games released for that console. There were plenty of games out there that were not AAA, that just kind of were released quietly and just slipped into obscurity. And one of the coolest things about the Xbox is that it was ahead of its time. Not many people had HD TVs back in the day. Most of the games could do 480p. Some of them go up as high as 720p. I even have one that goes up to 1080i in 16:9. So the widescreen TVs that everyone has nowadays, perfect. So let's start things off with Sega, because yes, Otogi Myth of Demons. During the PlayStation 2 and Xbox era, Sega, had obviously dropped out of the console market, but they became a third-party software company. From Software developed Otogi Myth of Demons. Sega released it in their stead, and it is a 3D beat-em-up that is not unlike the reboot of Ninja Gaiden that came out for the Xbox. It has pseudo-RPG elements to it, where you can level up your character in certain ways. The fighting mechanics are very fun. The combo system is really neat. The story is really wacky, but it's kind of cool. It's just kind of boring the way it's told. It's just like basically a black screen with your character, and the camera just kind of circles around them as they're being told what's going on. And the graphics are just absolutely beautiful, dark, moody, gothic, and the monsters that you fight don't start off very impressive, but the closer you get towards the end of the game, they just get massive and insane. Although the camera is kind of shit because it's unalterable, you can't really do anything with it, you can't even move it really, and it gets into really strange places that kind of hamper your ability to see what you're fighting. There's a lock-on system that lets you follow an enemy you want to beat up, and that doesn't really work reliably all the time. And even some of the upgrades you can choose are semi-worthless. It's a very fun game that you really need to take a look at if you haven't already. And apparently From Software and Sega thought that it was good enough that it did get a sequel. And then it just kind of ended there, which is kind of sad. I would love for Sega to continue this series because it had a lot more places it could go. And with today's capabilities for the consoles, wow, I could just imagine what it would look like.
Yes, indeed. The fire fades.
Fuck you, science!
Next is a game that I remember hearing a lot about, and then it just kind of went poof into the ether. I didn't really look back into it until I got back into collecting a couple years ago. And lo and behold, it actually ended up being pretty good, because I do kind of recall the reviews not being all that favorable towards it when it was released in 2005, but that's never stopped me from buying a game. I want to see it for myself with these eyes. These peepers need to see. Processariah. I can see why it didn't get good reviews, because it is yet another in the glut of first-person shooters that were released during this time period. Some people might have just tired of that genre. Not this guy. I'm always up for a first-person shooter. What it does with the mechanics is what always interests me. The storyline isn't all that great. It is cliche, but at the same time, it's kind of like goofy fun, kind of in like a B-movie sort of way, which is right up my alley. But one thing that I thought was great was that there is no auto-heal in this game. And what I mean by auto-heal is Bungie, when they created Halo, created this mechanic where if you have taken damage and you aren't taking any for a certain period of time, your health will regenerate. Basically kind of making the game a little easier than it should be. The previous generation, in the PlayStation 1 days, you had to find health packs if you wanted to regenerate your health. It didn't just come back on its own. You had to earn it. And this game, you have to find health packs in order to get your health back after you've taken damage, and they are not that plentiful, so you gotta work on your cover tactics if you don't want to get hit, you know what I'm saying? The play mechanics are fun. The weapons are kind of cool. There's this kind of cool blade that you start off with that looks like a really funky pair of brass knuckles. And the graphics are pretty decent for an Xbox game. The best part is the faces on the characters are great. Like, really great for this generation.
You're okay. You have a virus. You were put into stasis to slow it down.
What are you talking about? How'd I get a virus?
We're not really sure how it transmits yet. Maybe through blood.
Blood?
And it even has a map editor, which is awesome. I think the only other game that had anything like that was the Time Splitters games. And while the graphics are really cool most of the time, it is kind of glitchy. There's a lot of graphical tearing. The switching in between the weapons and your items is extremely awkward. I do not like it at all. It just kind of gets in the way of playing the game, where it should just be one button click and boom, you're on your next weapon. No, you've got to do this weird cycling thing now. And also the aiming is kind of loose and weird. But outside of that, it is a very fun game, especially if you're a first-person shooter fan. It doesn't really offer anything completely new, but what it does extremely well. Next is another game I had no idea existed, and I don't see how, since I am a huge fan of this guy's other game. I found this game randomly at a Goodwill, and I said, what, how, when, American McGee presents Scrapland. I absolutely loved American McGee's first game, and that was American McGee's Alice, which was his take on Alice in Wonderland. And it was super fun, super creative. I loved the designs of everything and just the way it was put together. It was creepy and gross and kind of disturbing in certain parts, but great game. It was a third-person action game, and it was one of the few games that I actually enjoyed playing on a PC. But anyway, Scrapland. It's a third-person action-adventure game where you play as this robot who has come to Earth, which is now known as Scrapland, and it is not occupied by any people. It's all robots. Humans are not allowed on the planet because they basically ruined it and decided to move off elsewhere to another planet. And you come looking for work. What American McGee does best with his games is that he creates these fully realized worlds. And this is no different. A lot of thought went into every aspect of this like trashed Earth. And the robot designs and just everything, the vehicles, the weapons, it's extremely impressive. It also contains a lot of unique play mechanics like body swapping. Once you unlock it, you can go to these terminals and you can take over the body of another robot that you've encountered before. But it's not only just on foot, third person adventuring. There's also a flying aspect to the game where you're on like a flying motorcycle, which is kind of cool. It's a little floaty, doesn't really control all that well, but, I mean, it is still enjoyable. And some of the missions become a little repetitive. And wow, some of the voice acting in this game is absolutely derpy.
I have just arrived in Chimera, sir. A lovely city, if you don't mind me saying so.
Chimera's a heap of scrap, though I've seen worse. What do you think of scrap?
Well, sir, I made myself from scrap, so I must like it.
I highly recommend you pick up a copy of this game if you can find it. I don't see it anywhere ever. Like, I was surprised that I actually ran into it at a Goodwill, of all places, a Goodwill. And yet I see it at none of the game stores that I frequent on the regular. Next is another first-person shooter, because I love first-person shooters. Painkiller Hell Wars. I do believe this is a port of a PC game. I could be wrong. And it kind of has this like Spawn sort of storyline going on where the main character you play as, he dies and then is recruited in the afterlife to go back to Earth as like an undead killing machine to destroy demons. You have lots and lots of rad-ass weapons in this game. Holy crap. Even the starting weapon that you get at the beginning of the game, which looks kind of like a harpoon gun, but it has two uses. One is it's used for melee combat. All the blades on it open up and turns into a fan that you can use to just hack the living crap out of every enemy that comes right up to your face. And the other one is actually a harpoon, where it'll shoot into something and you can bring it right up to you and then hack it up. The graphics are great, lots of really cool effects, lots of really cool environments. You go all over the place, heaven, earth, hell, all that. Multiplayer, everything you can ask for from a first-person shooter of the day is in here. It is done extremely well. Very dark, very creepy. But like I said, it is kind of like a Spawn ripoff, like a little too much at times. And the controls are really loose. Sometimes it's just really hard to aim at things and move around. You're always whacking into crap in the environments. That's what makes me think this was a PC game, just because of the sensitivity of the looking around and the movement. It's just way too fast. Lots of varied enemies, lots of really cool weapons. I mean, it's a first-person shooter with a twist, which is awesome. Painkiller Hell Wars is worth your time.
Do it.
Next is a really cool mashup game, which is kind of like part strategy game and part arena fighter. Wrath Unleashed, which was developed by The Collective and was published by LucasArts. If you've ever played the game Archon that came out for the PCs way back in the early 80s and then was eventually released on the NES, this is basically a massively updated version of that game. Instead of being on a chessboard like Archon was, this takes place on these hexagonal levels where you get to pick from 4 different characters that represent the different elements. There's fire, earth, water, and air. You get to pick one you want to use for your campaign, and then you go at it on these battlefields. You need to use your characters, move them around the board to secure specific tiles that have an icon on it that you need in order to win. And if someone on the other team has taken up a tile that you need, move on to it, and it turns into a 3D battlefield. And depending on what element that you're playing as and what element the tile is that you land on, you might get an advantage, you might get a disadvantage. There's lots of really cool creatures that you get to control, like these really awesome unicorns, and there's genies and dragons and all this kind of crazy crap. You get to do all these different spells, like teleport your people around the level. You get to freeze people in place so they can't move off of a tile. The storylines that you can play through as the 4 different characters, they're really cool and they all kind of tie in together. And this game has one of the greatest opening cinematics ever. Why? Because it was narrated by Mako, and he says his lines in the exact same tone that he did at the beginning of Conan.
In the beginning, there was only darkness. Then light shone in the void, and a new world was born. A realm forged from the elemental forces of earth, wind, water, and fire.
It is awesome. It gave me chills listening to that because Conan is one of my favorite movies. I mean, it's not all great. I mean, some of the map layouts for the boards that you play on are kind of lame and just kind of feel like they're thrown together at times. Sometimes they actually force you to use your magic because there'll be tiles that you need to get to that has nothing in between. So it's like an empty space. You can't jump over empty spaces. Only the unicorns can. No one else can. So you basically are forced to use your teleport spells up to move other characters to the spaces they need to get to. And while the creatures are cool that are in the game, there need to be more of a variety. I mean, everyone has almost the exact same character set, which is kind of disappointing. But just the fact that this is an update to one of my favorite computer games from when I was a child, Archon, this game just completely does it for me. Oh boy! This next game actually was suggested to me by, of course, Metal Jesus Rocks. Every time he says a game is good, I go out and buy it. Turns out he's right.
Yep.
90% of the time.
Oh, no, you didn't!
Just after he created one of his Hidden Gems videos that featured this game, I was just kind of like, that looks alright. I don't think I need that one. But I was at a local store just kind of perusing their cheap games section where everything I think is between like $1 and $5. And this game was sitting there for $2.50. And I said, okay, for $2.50, I think I'll jump for it. And, if it's crap, which it looked like to me when Metal Jesus was talking about it, it's no big loss. I mean, I could probably flip it for more than that. And that's Jager. It's a flight sim type of game, kind of like Wing Commander. but everything is planet-based. While the controls do take getting used to because just the button layout on the controller is kind of wacky and not all that intuitive, the combat itself is fun, and even though the missions aren't all that special half the time, blasting things out of the sky just does it for me every time. And it helps that the art direction for the game is fantastic. I love the designs of all of the ships and the towns and like the environments, and they all look great. I mean, sometimes it's just a generic looking island, but the ships that you fight and the ships that you fly around in and like some of the buildings that you get to fight around just look fantastic, especially in HD. And once again, what really does it for me with this game is the fact that it kind of plays out as this really stupid B-movie, which is my thing. I mean, I can't help enjoying that kind of aspect of games, especially when they do it right like this does. But because of that aspect is where the terrible voice acting comes in. Oh my god. There were times when I winced when characters were talking. Like, somebody stuck a needle in the back of my brain when somebody said a specific line. I just went like, what? Someone thought that was a good idea?
It's past the official criteria. All you have to do is turn her on.
I never have trouble turning them on.
And the character models are terrible. But the game does have this open world sort of environment that is really cool and fun to explore, kind of like Starfighter for the 3DO and the PlayStation 1. And I think the Saturn also. While I'm not cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs over this game like Metal Jesus was, I really do enjoy it. Next is another game that I had no idea was out there. Just randomly picked it up at a game store. I saw it for a couple dollars and I said, sure, why not? Like I said with Jager, if it was crap, I would have just flipped it. But it turned out to be pretty cool. Enclave. The thing that I like about it is that some people might think that this is a con, but to me it's a pro, and that is that it is sort of like a dumbed down version of Skyrim. It's a very simple third-person adventure with RPG elements. Sure, the graphics aren't the greatest thing ever, the music is kind of and it controls kind of loose. It is extremely fun, and it does what it does very well for the generation that the game was released. There's 12 different characters that you can unlock to play as, and there's 2 different campaigns that you can play through, sort of like Knights of the Old Republic for the Xbox, where you can either do a light campaign or a dark campaign. I always tend to go for the light side. Don't ask me why. Goody goody. But that's just more incentive to play through it a second time. And it's not a chore to play through either. Lots of weapons and upgrades to choose from. Lots of companions that you can bring along with you on your adventures. Lots of really cool enemies to fight. Some of them are kind of cliche, like, you know, the typical skeletons and zombies and goblins and whatnot. But the further you get in the game, the crazier things get, and the crazier armor you get, and the abilities you can unlock. And although I did say that I liked the fact that it is kind of like a dumbed down version of Skyrim, I would have appreciated if there was just a little bit more depth in there. Just a little. Just to slip me into the character's shoes that I'm playing as a little bit more. Yes, the controls aren't the greatest thing ever, and it looks kind of poopy, but it is a very entertaining game. Oh look, another first-person shooter.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Darkwatch by Capcom. Actually, it was developed by High Moon Studios. Capcom released it, but whatever. What I love about this game is it is Blade in the Wild West. Yes, you heard that right. It is a Wild West vampire horror first-person shooter. And that is why I love this game as much as I do. You play as this sheriff who gets bitten by a vampire, and as he slowly turns into a creature of the night, he starts to develop more and more powers, and then you start to be able to do some really cool things. It takes place in this fun, dark world that kind of toys around with the genre cliches from westerns and all that. Like, you get to ride a horse in this game. It is a vampire horse. You get into OK Corral style shootouts, but you're doing it against zombies. It helps the game controls extremely well, and the world that the game takes place in is fun and dark and creepy. And it put a smile on my face many times. And I am not a fan of westerns, like, at all. Like, I think I like 3 western movies out of all the ones ever made. But for some reason, this just did it for me. I seem to like westerns more in video game form because I love Gun and I love Red Dead Revolver, Red Dead Redemption. My issues are that the character models are kind of ugly and blocky and not all that inspired looking. They just kind of look generic, especially your character. I mean, for a guy who is turning into a vampire, he looks like an emo goth sheriff. And the weapons aren't all that great. They're just like variations of the ones that you would normally get in a first-person shooter. Like, you know, there's a pistol and a shotgun and a rifle. It does have one really awesome weapon, and that is the dynamite-laced crossbow. In the case of Darkwatch, it is all about the gameplay, and it is a lot of fun to play, and the levels are really well designed and laid out. Lots of really cool enemies to fight. I love those flying banshee things that, scream at you. They're really cool. Every time I bring up Darkwatch in a conversation about video games, everyone goes like, okay, what's so cool about that? And I try to explain it to them. It is a Blade Western. It is awesome. You need to give it a shot because it is so much fun to play. And you will not be disappointed because I know I wasn't. And I bought this game when it first came out back in the day. And I was hooked from the moment I dropped that disc into my Xbox.
Drop it like it's hot. Drop it like it's hot.
This next game was touted as being this epic game that was going to change the way you play games. There's even this massive contest that the developers were banking on where you could play the game and possibly win $1 million. They were that sure that this game was going to be this massive hit that they were expecting it would become. And it didn't. It flopped spectacularly. Advent Rising, released by Majesco. This was going to be the Halo killer when it came to the Xbox. And it is a third-person game that rips off Halo every which way. The alien designs look like the Covenant. You get to drive around in vehicles that control exactly like the ones in Halo. The weapons work exactly like they do in Halo. Only difference is it's in the third person. You play as a pilot who is taking an ambassador to a first contact meeting with an alien race, the first one that the humans have ever met. And their first message for us is, you're all going to die because there's another race coming that are going to annihilate you. From that moment on, it is just non-stop action and shit blowing up and people dying around you. And while it is a ripoff of Halo, it is a very, very good ripoff of Halo. And it does things just differently enough because you don't start as this super soldier. You're a pilot who just kind of randomly picks up guns and is able to blow creatures away. But you find out you're special and you start to develop powers as the game goes on. And that's where things go completely crazy and off the wall awesome. There's a love story for the ladies. The story was written by Orson Scott Card, the guy who wrote Ender's Game and all of the endless sequels. The cutscenes are very film-like. I mean, it's almost like you're watching a movie. There were times where I didn't even realize I still had a controller in my hand because I was so engrossed in what was going on. The weapons and the vehicles, while they are ripped right out of Halo, are all fun to use, and the powers that you can develop are freaking awesome. I love that aspect of this game alone. What's best about this game is the presentation. Like I said, it is almost film-like, and it goes seamlessly from cutscene to gameplay about 75% of the time. It's awesome. I mean, it got a really high-profile soundtrack release because the music was composed by Tommy Tallarico, and goddamn, he did come up with an awesome main theme that kind of plays throughout the entire game in different variations. It is amazing. Worth picking up the soundtrack alone. But like the Metal Gear Solid games, yeah, some of those cutscenes drag on for a little too long, and there were times where I was engrossed by what I was watching, but there was other times where I was like, can I start playing the game now, please? The controls are also a little loose. I mean, aiming is kind of a pain in the ass, but there is a lock-on ability, which is awesome. And the worst thing about this game is that it does feel like it was a little bit rushed because it is a little unpolished. There's like some frame rate slowdown issues. There's a couple areas where there's a lot of graphical tearing, and it's just, when you see how awesome and beautiful this game looks and how well designed everything is, I mean, everything in this game just looks amazing. Lots of great lighting effects, but all of a sudden it goes into this heavy slowdown where there's more than one character on screen sometimes. Wow, way to ruin the illusion, guys. This is one of the greatest games released for the Xbox as far as I'm concerned. Not nearly as great as Halo, but it is a very, very close second. And it's the game you never knew you wanted, and now I'm telling you that you do want it. And then we started on a game released by Sega. Let's finish on a game released by Sega. Back in the day, I was not too keen on the racing games. That has changed since I got back into collecting in 2013. Sometimes you just want to sit down and play a mindless game that doesn't require anything other than reflexes and features nothing but great gameplay. A lot of racing games out there deliver just that. And the one I want to talk about is Outrun 2. Obviously a sequel to the classic arcade game by Sega, and there was a couple other iterations of this out there. I think there's another one for the Xbox that I need to look up. I think it's called Coast to Coast. I could be wrong. And Outrun 2 features awesome racing. It is so much fun because the gameplay is tweaked to perfection. Lots of beautiful landscapes and areas to drive through. There is a map with different paths that you can take to branch off into. There's an easy path that you can take, and then there's like a mid-ground, and then there's like the hard areas where there's lots of twists and turns. There's lots of fun modes. I mean, yes, there is a straight racing mode, but there's one mode that I love called the Heart Attack mode, where the girl that is always in your passenger seat gives you objectives objectives that you have to complete in order to gain hearts. The more hearts you get, the better your score ends up being. She might say, for this round, you need to pass a certain amount of cars, and every time you pass a car, you get a heart. She might say, you need to drift as much as you possibly can in this round. And the more you do, the more hearts you get, and the better your score is. There's a mission mode where there's like a little over 100 missions that you can participate in. And even back in the day, this was online. You could race online, which was novel back then. But nowadays, it's kind of like, yeah, you better have that in there, or I'm not buying your shut game, okay? It is a great, fun update to a game that I loved back in the day. And goes to show you that sometimes a simple concept, when you know it works, does not get old. When I'm in the mood for a racing game, I either reach for Burnout or this. Most of the time it's this, because this is even simpler than Burnout. Although I do love me that crash mode. Crash mode. Oh. And there you have it. 10 really amazing diamonds in the rough for the Xbox that you might have known about, you might not have known about. I'm hoping that I at least introduced a couple new ones to you. But hey, there's still plenty more to choose from, because it took me a while to narrow my picks down to 10 for this video. I could definitely do at least 1 or 2 more. And there will be plenty more Diamonds in the Rough videos coming up for various consoles, so keep an eye out for those also. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. You might as well. You're already watching it. Click. Share the video on the social media. Help me spread the word about the old-ass retro gamer. And if you like what you see, click that thumbs up button. As always, feel free to leave any and all comments below. So what are some of your favorite Diamonds in the Rough for the Xbox? Have you played any of these games? Is today the first time you have seen anything about any of these games? And are you considering picking any of them up? If you've played them before, what are your thoughts on them? You think Advent Rising gets a bum rap? So until next time, I am Chris, the old-ass retro gamer, signing off.